Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, hope you've all been doing well. In this video, I wanted to discuss the newly launched GTX 1060 from Nvidia, discuss some of its features, specs, and also talk about how it compares with the Radeon RX 480 from AMD. The reason why this card was anticipated by so many is because this card is geared towards and targeted towards the mainstream audience. As you all probably know, and I've mentioned this before, the mainstream / mid-level market is what generates the most revenue in this industry. The market is much bigger than the high end, so therefore it makes sense as to why this card is getting so much attention from everyone in the community. When Nvidia unveiled the GTX 1060, they claimed that this card would yield performance along the lines of a GTX 980. Now that's a pretty big claim, and looking back at the previous generation, the 900 series Maxwell cards, we know that the GTX 980 was targeted towards the high-end enthusiast market that came with a hefty price tag. So that will be huge for the mainstream audience. I feel like with this generation, this market segment is getting a lot more attention. Gamers that are on a budget will be able to attain a build which will give them great value for their dollar. Another reason as to why the GTX 1060 was anticipated by many is because this card was the answer from Nvidia to AMD's value king, the RX 480. As you all know, the RX 480 is another card aimed towards the mainstream / mid-level market and offers great price to performance ratio. So with this new generation from Nvidia and AMD, Pascal and Polaris respectively, we finally have a direct head-to-head comparison, something I was very interested in seeing, and I'm sure many others were as well. The reason why it took a little while before we could see a direct battle between the two manufacturers this generation is because Nvidia decided to focus on the high-end first, and AMD went for the mainstream. So I'll give you guys a quick rundown of the specs for both of these cards as like a side-by-side comparison. So starting off with the GTX 1060, this card has 1280 CUDA cores. It's based on the Pascal architecture and is using the GP106 chip. Its manufacturing process is built upon the 16nm FinFET process. It has 80 texture units, 48 ROPs, has a core clock of 1506 MHz and a boost clock of 1708 MHz. Its memory speed is clocked at 8 GHz with a memory bus of 192-bit, a memory bandwidth of 192 gigabytes per second, and it has a memory size of 6 gigabytes of GDDR5 and a TDP of 120 watts. So very low, it's very efficient, and it obviously comes with those extra features that Nvidia showed off at their event, such as Ansel, memory compression, simultaneous multi-projection, G-Sync, and all those great VR features. So, moving on to the red team, we have the RX 480, which is sporting 2304 stream processors based on the Polaris architecture using the Polaris 10 chip, based on the 14nm FinFET process, has 144 texture units, 32 ROPs, has a core clock of 1120 MHz and a boost clock of 1266 MHz, and has a memory speed of 8 GHz or 7 GHz depending on which variant you buy. Has a memory bus of 256-bit, memory bandwidth of 320 gigabytes per second or 224 gigabytes per second, and a memory size of 8 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes GDDR5, and has a TDP of 150 watts, and obviously supports HDR content, FreeSync, all those AMD features. So now that you guys know the specs of the two cards, how does the GTX 1060 compare against the RX 480? Well, from most of the benchmarks I saw, they all basically showed similar results. The GTX 1060 does in fact trade blows with the GTX 980, and that is quite impressive for a card with this price and this tier. Now with that said, that should automatically tell you that the GTX 1060 is faster than the RX 480. What is interesting, however, is that from most of the reviews I saw, a lot of them were showing that majority of the results were obtained from DirectX 11 games. As we all know, Nvidia did do a better job than AMD in DirectX 11, so therefore if someone was to watch the reviews, they would see that the GTX 1060 is considerably faster than an RX 480. However, looking at results from games running on the DirectX 12 or Vulkan APIs, the RX 480 and the GTX 1060 swap places, and now it's the red team that takes point. So the RX 480 offers significantly better performance than the GTX 1060 and DirectX 12 titles such as Hitman and Total War Warhammer, and crushed it in Doom running on the Vulkan API. This was one gripe I actually had with many of the reviews that I saw. I actually will drop a link in the video description to a video from ADOREDTV. He basically explains that many of the reviewers had used GameWorks titles for the majority of their games during their testing. So it makes it seem that the GTX 1060 has a huge advantage over the RX 480, which isn't the case. Not going to get too much into it, you can watch the videos for yourself so you can see what I'm talking about and form your own opinion about it. The predicament here is that if someone was choosing between these two cards, they would have to carefully take into account the types of games they play, what are they buying the card for, and how long they plan on keeping the card. The GTX 1060 is a great card for DirectX 11 games, and the RX 480 shines bright in games using DirectX 12 and Vulkan. Now this argument gets a little more interesting when the price factor is brought in. Yes, the GTX 1060 and RX 480 are not the same price, and with the GTX 1060 costing more than the 8GB variant of the RX 480, for some people, this card may not seem so attractive then. The RX 480 costs $200 to $240 depending on which model you buy, and the GTX 1060 ranges from $250 to $300, keeping in mind that there is only one single variant of the 1060. Taking into consideration of the GTX 1060's price, what you're getting here is a card that is faster, consumes less power, and has better overclocking capability. However, everyone's cases are different, and everyone's preferences are different. Some people have a higher budget or a flexible budget and will go for a GTX 1060. For those that don't, well, the best option for those people would be an RX 480, and that's totally fine. Another huge thing to take into account when looking into buying these cards is G-Sync versus FreeSync. G-Sync and FreeSync are Nvidia's and AMD's adaptive refresh technologies that many monitor manufacturers will implement. G-Sync monitors actually cost more than FreeSync monitors due to licensing reasons. So taking that into account, a G-Sync monitor paired with a GTX 1060 will substantially cost more than an RX 480 paired with a FreeSync monitors, making the red team more attractive for people on a lower budget. Nvidia's graphical features such as simultaneous multi-projection and Anvil, along with shadow play recording software, will probably be very appealing to some individuals, so that's why they will probably pick up a GTX 1060. Another thing I want to address, since I mentioned only US prices, this may actually not be the case for everyone around the world. I mean, just up north, here in Canada, one of my local computer hardware stores is selling the GTX 1060 and the RX 480 for the same price. If I was in that store right now and I had a GTX 1060 and an RX 480 in front of me, priced exactly the same, I would probably lean towards picking up the GTX 1060. I've also seen many posts and threads online where people have mentioned that the RX 480 is actually a lot more expensive than the GTX 1060 in their countries, so that decision is pretty much a no-brainer at that point. So prices will vary depending on where you are in the world, and that will play a huge role into which card many users and gamers will pick up. Something else to consider is duration. How long do you plan on keeping the card? If you plan on picking up these mainstream cards to hold you over until AMD comes out with their VEGA lineup, or when Nvidia comes out with the 1080 Ti or the new Titan, then the GTX 1060 will be the better choice here. The reason why I say that is because we've seen that the GTX 1060 offers greater performance than the RX 480 and DirectX 11 titles, which are currently still the most dominant titles right now. We don't have many DirectX 12 titles, and we don't have many titles running on the Vulkan API. However, if you plan on keeping your graphics card for as long as possible, then the RX 480 will be the better choice. We've seen AMD cards age better in the long run, have increasing performance due to better drivers, and with more DirectX 12 and Vulkan titles being released in the future, the RX 480 will offer you great bang for your buck. Not saying that it isn't currently doing that already, but you guys get what I mean here. So short-term buy, go for the GTX 1060. Long-term buy, go for the RX 480. Since both of these cards are still relatively new since hitting the market, stock is a concern and will also be a deciding factor. For some, it might just come down to whichever card they can get their hands on first. Stock for both cards is very limited, man. These cards come and go as soon as they're listed as in stock from retailers and e-tailers. An important thing I also want to bring to your attention was that in regards to the RX 480, we only have the reference models in stock, or have seen reference models go in stock. We haven't had any of the board partners release their cards with custom cooling solutions, whereas with the GTX 1060, board partners did have their cards ready to go on launch day. So that will be huge, since I know many people despise reference cards due to their noise and thermal issues, along with having a preference of a third-party custom cooler to match their setup. A weird thing that Nvidia decided to do with the GTX 1060 was to exclude an SLI connector. Nvidia's reasoning behind this is that if you're interested in more performance, simply just go pick up a GTX 1060 or a 1080. So I thought this was a big disappointment, because I really like it when a manufacturer gives you many options and flexibility with their hardware, but here they took away those options from the user. I mean, what if someone bought a GTX 1060 and later down the road wanted more performance and wanted to pick up a second card to use in an SLI configuration? Sure, they could sell their card, but I mean, sometimes it isn't that simple. That individual may live in an area where their used market isn't so saturated or is just filled with lowballers. Trust me, I've experienced this firsthand. It gets very frustrating. And I know you could list it on eBay and ship the card, but shipping cards can be a nuisance as well. You may have different shipping rates, and what if the buyer claims that the card never arrived or it got lost in the mail? You know, all these little small reasons are enough for people not to go through all that. Like before I upgraded to an R9 390, I was using an R9 270X and I was looking for buyers, but kept on receiving ridiculous offers in my area, to the point where I was thinking of buying a second 270X to Crossfire so I wouldn't have to go through the hassle of selling my old card. However, fortunately for me, I decided to be a little more patient and eventually found a buyer. But I mean, I've went off topic here with my story, but you guys get the point I was trying to make. Having the option to Crossfire or SLI is something many will take into account. I mean, if you look back at Computex 2016, when AMD unveiled the RX 480, the Crossfire performance was one of the biggest selling points from AMD. The fact that they showed off two 480s beating a 1080 and costing less piqued the interest for many. So yeah, that kind of sucks that Nvidia has taken that option away from us, but you could actually still kind of use two 1060s with technologies such as multi-display adapter MDA or link display adapter LDA, but that's only if games will support that, and it's really up to the devs. Now that I've discussed pretty much the performance comparison of the two cards, their features, their cost, etc., you probably are wondering which one I would recommend or which one I would buy. Well, I can't give you a definite answer to that question. Like I said before, everyone has different preferences, needs, conditions, and budgets. Even I'm not sure entirely which one I would choose if I was looking to buy a new graphics card in that performance tier, because they are both quite compelling products. Sure, you will always have those extremist or overly patriotic individuals that swear by one brand no matter what, and you know what, hey man, to each their own, but you honestly wouldn't go wrong buying either card. Nvidia and AMD both have made excellent cards here, and I'm really loving the attention that the mainstream audience is getting. Honestly, with this past generation of video cards, I felt as if the mainstream audience and budget users were always getting overshadowed by the high-end flagship products. Let's just all take a moment to really appreciate the PC hardware that is available to us, the capabilities, the options. It truly is a fantastic time to be a PC gamer. Well guys, that pretty much wraps up this video. If this video helped you guys out and you found it interesting, then leave a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts by leaving a comment in the comment section down below. I'm interested in really knowing, are you going to be buying an RX 480 or a GTX 1060? Also, if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys so much for your time, for watching my video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.